thanks for the Iowa State University and the Department of Horticulture for giving me the opportunity to share part of my research. My name is Camila Ulloa. I'm a master student in the Horticulture Department of Purdue University. And in this case, I will talk about characterizing the US market of salad mixes. In this case, more related to a cluster segmentation or a cluster analysis that we have been working on during this first year. So first, I would like to say that I'm happy to collaborate with you and to develop new ideas for the agribusiness industry, and hope you enjoy the presentation. So let me share the screen, please. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm working with Professor Ariana Torres, that is an associate professor at Purdue University in the Horticulture Department, and also from Agriculture Economics Department. So first, we're going to talk about the market of salad mixes. In recent years, salad mixes have become of great interest among consumers because they represent a convenient alternative to traditional vegetables with a high added value. So we can say that in the consumption side, Americans are consuming more fresh produce as many pursue healthier diets. Also, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommend at least 3 servings per day of fresh vegetables to lower the risk of mortality and in this of many chronic diseases like cardiovascular diseases, sorry. So as it is for any ready-to-eat product, the production process of salad mixes entails several further stages after the agricultural phase. So following the harvest, salad mixes production consists of curing, cleaning, disinfecting, and packaging. All these 3 phases represent we can say an additional source of environmental impacts, such as emissions and energy and water consumption. For instance, we can say that washing and packing require significant water and energy sources. So we can see that there is a growing consumer awareness of environmental issues that has increased the consumer demand for environmental friendly products, not only for salad mixes, but also for other food products and not food products. So it in the market, it exists eco-label or green products that are looking for to connect or to focus on these kind of consumers. So these previous studies, I will talk about previous studies that have shown the potential role of emphasizing these sustainability attributes on the food labels to influence consumers' preferences and to drive purchase decisions. Specifically, features related to the environmental footprint on production methods tend to impact purchase decisions across consumer studies. So first, I will talk about some literature review about this new acknowledgements about the market of salad mixes. So for example, Laurerio et al. In 2001 reported that consumers with a robust environmental attitude tend to demand food cultivated by producers who are strongly committed with environmental friendly practices. Also, some findings from Wang et al. In 2022 suggest that market practices like the production of eco-friendly products and educating consumers on environmental practices are significant drivers influencing this buying behavior. Also, consumers considering 3 product attributes when making a purchase are, I don't know if you have seen this information before, that there exists these 3 product attributes, such as the search, the experience, and the credence. So the search attributes are those that the consumers can verify, at the point of purchase, such as the price, the size, the aroma, whereas the experience like attributes are more related to what the consumer like have, or what kind of experience the consumers have. For example, the sweetness, the flavor, the texture, and finally the credence attributes are those kind of attributes that are difficult to ascertain like directly by consumers at the point of purchase or after the consumption. So these credence attributes typically like command a price premium and are communicated through labels. Some examples of that can be organically grown or locally produced. So like more specific, in this paper, these environmentally friendly goods are often defined as credence goods. Environmental footprints, labels, or claims are a way of bridging like the gap in a product, like providing environmental information and informing the buyer about the environmental impact of the product for sale. Also, we can say that producers and food retailers tend to gain like from eco labels by improving like corporate image, providing opportunities for product differentiation and a platform like to get a competitive advantage and helping to like to protect the environment and raise consumer awareness of environmental issues. So we know like that markets are really rarely homogeneous. So thus understanding like how consumers form market segments can help food marketers like to develop like or target distinct groups of consumers and develop long-run like relationships. So the market segmentation is a common and effective mechanism to target like niche markets formed by consumers who think and behave in a similar manner. This can help, like as I mentioned before, industry marketers like to generate appropriate targeting, communication, and encouraging messages to make like attributes claims more relevant. Therefore, like this study's objective is to cluster consumers and create market segments of consumers based on their preference for environmental attributes that are commonly found on labels of salad mixes. So we evaluate like choices of the following qualities: carbon footprint, food miles, energy usage, greenhouse gas emissions, pollinator friendly, water usage, biodegradable packaging, and fertilizer usage. So first, is good like to mention some factors that influence preference on environmental attributes. So through the environmental consciousness among consumers is on the rise, not all consumers are equally concerned about the environment and expect eco-friendly products. So we can say that socio-demographic and behavioral traits are crucial profile factors in consumer segmentation. For example, we can say, like in a study in an explanatory study made by Jane et al. In 2006, these studies suggest that females are found to be outperforming males concerning their willingness to seek environmental friendly products. This same study affirms that although there is a negative relationship, or there exists a negative relationship between age, which signifies a greater tendency among relative younger persons to actively like search for environmental friendly products, these persons like appear less enthusiastic about choosing minor polluting products. I mean, greenhouse gas emissions products or low greenhouse gas emission products. Also, we can consider regional differences in attainment that can be associated with preferences when buying food products. For example, Jean et al. In 2000 conclude in their study that market segmentation and willingness to pay for organic products in Spain, that's called like the article, he mentioned that consumers in the producing region, Navarra, were more often or were more prepared to pay more for organic products than those in the consuming area, in this case, Madrid. So consumers may purchase products from small family farms to implicitly support rural areas or rural economies, and also the preservation of the environment. Also, consumers who have a higher level of environmental concern are generally more likely to engage in sustainable behaviors. So we can see, like in this case, or we can summarize that the like difference exists in gender, age, region, or living areas, and also market preferences and market characteristics. And these kind of, or these factors or these variables uh, can be considered, or in this case, we consider these variables to measure when or how to identify environmental footprint claims and preferences. So now talking about like more related to the consumer segments in the literature, like since markets are really readily uniform, market segmentation is popular and is an efficient like a strategy to connect with sets of consumers that have like the similar beliefs and behaviors. So like in the market, or in the industry, several types of environmental footprint claims and labels are available, and various articles like discuss their application efficiency and value. However, a few published studies that have investigated consumer preference for salad mix market. For example, I would like to mention a study that it was made in Italy that evaluated consumer significance of 6 factors that influence the choice of ready-to-eat salads. These 6 factors were appearance, freshness, organic farming, brand, expiring date, and package transparency. So in this study, they found consumers can be segmented into 2 clusters based on the mean like rating. The 2 clusters were like the information oriented and the sensory qualities oriented segments. The first segment prefers labels that include nutritional information, environmentally sustainable production methods, and ethical concerns. And on the other hand, the sensory qualities oriented group prefer to clear packaging that this kind of packaging enables more direct visual examination of and cares to prevent product waste. The second study that I would like to mention is the one made by Berain et al. In 2012, that they reviewed the segments created after checking 16 articles. So we can say that they reported the existence of 3 general consumer segments rely on their values toward food attributes, including the green segment, the potential green segment, and the non-green segment. This was based on consumers' score for high, medium, and low environmental attitudes by order. Also, G et al. In 2000 categorized consumers depending on their concerns or environmental issues related to food products, including vegetables. They segmented consumers into consumers, likely consumers, and unlikely consumers. This considering like some variables or factors like lifestyle and consumption labels and attitudes towards organic food products and environmental issues. So in this study, the results show that organic food consumers were more concerned about environmental impact than other consumer segments, which increases their preference to purchasing foods produced with sustainable methods. Then we have the likely cluster that was like identified, or it was represented by potential consumer group, and the unlikely that they were characterized or represented by the less concerned with natural food consumption. These 2 last examples about consumer segmentation of food products, I would like to mention like the first one made by Torres in 2020. She reported the existence of 4 customer segments that were the committed, the farm to fork, and the unattached. The unattached and the skeptic. So there were 4 segments. And these 4 segments were identified like according to their explicit and implicit attributes. When she mentions explicit attributes, it means like organic and local food, and implicit attributes are small, family farms and sustainable attributes. So according to their results, the committed cluster were strongly value all the four produce attributes as important. The farm to fork, they had a high preference for characteristics that were commonly related to local food systems, but not for organic farming. The unattached cluster did not show high preference for any of the attributes, and the skeptic, it had like a low valuation for all features. So they were not really interested in buying organic. And the last study from Torres and Langhoven provides like market segmentation scenarios and segment profiles between the US melon market through consumers' attitudes, preferences, and purchasing behavior. So we can say that they reported segments: the local menu lovers, the convenient shopper, the ripe for the picking consumer, and same, like each cluster had like is different like characteristics that were different, or these kind of consumers were identify difference regarding their demographic factors and market factors. So what kind of environmental footprints environmental footprint claims we care about in this study? Since several characteristics related to environmental footprint of production are used in labeling like fresh vegetables, including natural resource usage, such as water usage and energy usage practices, some emissions, like food miles, carbon dioxide, environmental pollution also. It's important to keep in mind like these kind of claims or these kind of concerns to know what to provide to consumers. So we can say that some articles have evaluated consumer preferences regarding natural resource usage and emissions in food products. For example, the study made in Canada and Germany examined like consumers' preferences for various products with water and carbon footprint labels. Their findings suggested a negative correlation between carbon and water footprint and consumers' preferences for a food product. This same study found that consumers are willing to pay a price premium for lower levels of carbon emissions and water usage. And also they require a compensation. I mean, like a price discount to be willing to purchase products with higher level of emissions. Moreover, like we can say that a study like occurring in 2020 with data representing like the countries in the four continents investigate how consumers view the water saving choices in the food chains and how to recognize what is sustainable products through a logo. Also, sales of minimally processed and packed salad mixes is increasing rapidly. So this is due to their perceived like convenience. So numerous studies like have shown that consumers need like for convenience, I mean packaging, is correlated with purchases of fresh packaged foods. So the main characteristic of this eco package includes like biodegradability and the capacity of recycling and reuse, that like these kind of characteristics have been shown to impact like consumers' environmental consumption patterns in this specific. So what is the trouble with packaging in this case? This trouble begins as its like creation of or production. I mean that each form of packaging uses a lot of resources like energy, water, chemicals, petroleum, minerals, wood, and fibers to produce. So its manufacture often generates air emissions, including greenhouse gases, heavy metals, also like toxic contaminants that are like or can harm the environment. So due to the increased significance of food miles, studies in the US show that the local food labels, these kind of labels substantially like can impact a consumer's behavior. It's important also to mention that few studies or few researchers have found that consumers are willing to pay like a significantly higher price for fresh produce that is with less or no pesticide residues. This can be, or the reason of this may be that the reduction of pesticide is directly related to private gains, such as food safety, like in this case, I mean, potentially comprise both health and environmental benefits. And lastly, there is a scarcity of studies investigating how important pollinator-friendly practices are for consumer of salad mixes in specific. So this study or this article can talk more about this kind of claim. So to get more in detail about what the paper talks about, the characterizing the U.S. salad mixes, the data of this paper was obtained in fall 2020 using a web-based survey of salad mix consumers by Qualtrics. Qualtrics distributed the survey to a panel of consumers in the 50 states of the USA. Also, we recruited respondents who were greater than 18 years old and had eaten salad mixes in the 12 months before the study. So we obtained a total of 2,100 consumers. Also, I would like to mention that the survey participants were recruited to represent the US population regarding age, gender, income, race, and ethnicity. For example, 21.1% of our sample is below 30 years old, 49.6% are between 30 and 60 years old, and 29.4% are above 60 years old. Also, in addition, the proportion of women in our sample was 51%. So a total of 2,100 consumers were reported that have eaten fresh vegetables in the past 12 months of the study. So I would like to mention what kind of variables the survey collected in order to identify in order to create this cluster analysis. So first, the survey collected information on consumers' values of every environmental attribute. As I mentioned before, we asked respondents about the level of importance they place on environmental footprint claims when purchasing fresh salad mixes. So we asked these respondents to slide bars from 0, that is not important at all, to 100, that is extremely important, based on their evaluation of every environmental footprint claim. So we use these slide bars because they are more friendly, and also they provide a more appealing, a more appealing survey experience than the traditional Likert scale questions. Also, these environmental variables used in this survey include, as I mentioned, biodegradable packaging, low carbon footprint, energy usage, fertilizer usage, food miles, greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, and pollinator friendly. So these attributes are the dependent variable. And now talking about the independent variables, the survey also collected demographic factors. In this case, the demographic factors include age, gender, race, ethnicity, marital status, number of children and adults living in the household, education level, and geographic location. Also, we divided the area of living into urban, suburban, and rural. And finally, we categorize the household income into the 3 groups. The low income were the ones that had less than $50,000 per year. The mid income was from 50,000 to 100,000, and the high income was greater than 100,000. And finally, the consumption questions was on average, how many servings of fresh whole vegetables do you consume on a daily basis? So we can say a serving of fresh vegetable is approximately 1 cup. Then mentioning the market preferences and market characteristics. In the case of market preferences, to determine the preferred marketplace to shop for salad mixes, we categorize markets into 4 groups: the direct to consumer, the large chain stores, retail stores, and online markets. The direct to consumer markets, some examples will be at farm or roadside stands, community support agriculture, and farmers markets. For large chain stores, we have examples such as Walmart or Costco. For retail stores, we have local grocery stores, discount grocery stores, and ethnic grocery stores. And finally, for online markets, we can have an example such as Instacart. When mentioning the market characteristics, we also ask consumers to place their level of importance from 0 to 100 again on different market characteristics such as price, seasonability, availability of locally grown and organically grown fresh vegetables, and fresh vegetables sourced from family-owned farms. And like the final category of these independent variables, we have the environmental perceptions. So we ask consumers also to place their level of importance on a 5-point Likert scale with different statements that include sustainability is a topic that is important to me when purchasing or in my purchasing decisions. The second is when I buy food, I prefer organic products. And the third one was I'm concerned about wasting the resources of our planet. So what methodology we had for this cluster analysis? This cluster analysis, the cluster analysis has been commonly used in economics to categorize consumers into groups according to their traits. So a 2-stage cluster analysis was used to identify consumer segments with comparable percentual functions. We have the hierarchical and the partitional clustering to make sure that they are stable and accurate clusters. This first stage consisted of a hierarchical clustering with worst minimum variance method. So we use the square Euclidean distance that as the similarity measure performed to examine in this order to examine the relative environmental footprint factors scores for these labels that I mentioned. And then one of the most used criteria for determining the number of clustering is the Kalinske criterion. So this hierarchical clustering performance conclude that 3 clusters are the approximate number of market segmentation. In order to reduce the between cluster variation, the K-mean technique shows the centers of the initial clusters and from the first step and allocated the additional observation to the closer clusters. Then after getting these results of the 2-stage cluster analysis, a cross-tabulation, we use a cross-tabulation to examine the overlap between the 2 cluster techniques, the word linkage and the K-means. So according to the findings, they indicated a considerable overlap, that it was greater than 80% between the 2 cluster processes. So that points out that it's a solid 3-cluster solution. And then we use a one-way analysis of variance, an ANOVA, comparison of means. So in this case, the cluster were characterized by comparing consumer demographics, market preferences, market characteristics, and environmental perceptions about food consumption. So again, this ANOVA finding showed that there was a substantial attribute mean difference between the clusters, which is a good a good answer or response to this model. After that, we developed an ordered probit model. This is an appropriate framework to model ordinal survey responses where they observe the dependent variable. When the observed dependent variable has an ordinal scale. So this model is based on a Latin continuous variable that is y, that is underlying the ordinal responses observed. The latent variable is a linear combination of some variables x and a disturbance term or a error term or error part that has a normal distribution. So in particular, we let that each observation, I mean I, index the salad is or talks about each salad mixes consumer. We have beta, that is a vector that is unknown. This is the vector of the parameters to be estimated. X is a vector of predicted variables that include demographic, market preferences, market characteristics, and environmental perceptions. And yeah, as I mentioned, Y is the unobserved latent variable. So according to different literature review, such as Cameron and Trivedi, we can see that there is an equation to say the probability that a consumer belongs to a J segment. So the coefficient represents the impact of each independent variable on the probability of consumers belonging to a J group comparing to the baseline group. So finally, for interpreting these results, we use the marginal effects that were found by the derivative of the prediction function. And we can get these results. I will show you later, obtaining results as percentage points. So the results of the cluster analysis, we segmented the fresh salad mixes consumers based on their preferences for environmental footprint claims. So the two-stage cluster analysis suggested a three-cluster solution: the deep-rooted, that is the first cluster, the undecisive, and the skeptic cluster. Also, the results reflected a consumer affiliation overlap of 87.8%, which we can say that is considered a robust segmentation. And as we can see, in the table, that represents the mean of the mean comparisons or the ANOVA by cluster of salad mixes consumer evaluation of environmental attributes. In this table, we can identify the cluster description by the environmental variables. So first we have the first cluster, that is the deep-rooted, and we can see that is the second largest cluster with 760 consumers out of 2,100 of the full sample. They showed a high value of two environmental attributes. And as we can see, the three claims that consumers in the deep-rooted had the highest valuation for were the low fertilizer use with 87%, low greenhouse gas emissions with 87%, and pollinator friendly with 87% too. Then we have the undecisive cluster. So given this moderate value consumers in this cluster, we give this, or we name this kind of consumers. This is the largest cluster with 843 consumers out of 2,100 of the full sample. And also the consumers in this cluster value the environmental footprint claims of the salad mixes as moderately important. But it's important to mention that the highest valuation variables were low fertilizer usage with 60.21%, pollinator friendly with 58.46%, and low greenhouse gas emissions with 57.57%. And finally, we have the cluster 3, that are the skeptics. They received the name of skeptics, given that the consumers in this cluster had the lowest valuation of the environmental footprint claims of salad mixes compared to the other two groups. So this is the smallest clusters of the study with 496 consumers out of 2,100 of the full sample. And it's important to mention that the highest valuation variables were low fertilizer use with 23%, pollinator friendly with 20.20, 66 out of 100, and low food miles with 17.24 out of 100. So it's important to highlight that the three groups prioritize the low fertilizer usage, and also is relevant for the three groups, the pollinator-friendly claim, and for the deep-rooted and the indecisive, the low greenhouse gas emission claim is important. So I hope you can like see this table that represents the mean comparisons, the ANOVA, by cluster for fresh salad mix consumers regarding the demographics, market preferences, market characteristics, and environmental perceptions. So I like to give a general idea about the first cluster, the deep-rooted. This cluster showed the highest proportion of high-income households with 42%, the highest proportion of Latino consumers, and the lowest proportion of single consumers compared to the other two groups. This Latino result, or this positive effect, might be directly related to Latinos' pro-environment culture. We can say that the deep-rooted consumers show the highest proportion of children in households, approximately 2 kids in their house. And this is the highest ratio of college-educated consumers, and the highest proportion of consumers living in urban areas, relative to the indecisive and the skeptic clusters. This can be supported by a study made in 2010 that found that consumers with higher income and educated have more interest in organic products. And these results are also consistent with the demographic characteristics of the deep-rooted, because this is the group that had the highest educated and with the highest income across the clusters. In addition, we can mention that the deep-rooted reported the highest proportion of consumers residing in the Northeast and the highest consumption of fresh salad mixes across the clusters compared to the other two groups. When we analyzed the market preferences for the deep-rooted again, we found that they had the highest preference for the direct consumer and online markets compared to the counterparts. So this positive effect can be explained given that this group was one of the youngest cluster. So younger people usually shop online. Also, results show that the deep-rooted show the highest valuation for the market attributes that we evaluate in this study, such as price of the salad mixes, prices of locally grown vegetables, and family-owned farms production. This relative again to the indecisive and the skeptic clusters. And finally, talking about the deep-rooted consumers, they showed the highest valuation for environmental perceptions, such as sustainability, preference for organic products, worrying about wasting the planet's resources, this compared to the other two groups. When talking about the indecisive, that is the second cluster, these consumers show the highest proportion of low-income households compared to the other two groups. They had the highest proportion of consumers living in the rural areas with 22%. The indecisive cluster had a higher preference for direct-to-consumers type of markets with 23% than the skeptics, compared to the skeptics, and have a higher priority for retail markets than the deep-rooted. Also, consumers in the indecisive cluster had a moderate preference for the market characteristics and environmental perception relative to the other groups. Finally, this cluster, the third cluster, that was the skeptics, had the highest proportion of older consumers, the highest proportion of female participation, and they were represented by medium income households relative to the deep-rooted and the indecisive cluster. Also, these skeptics had like the smallest number of children in the household relative to the other groups, had the highest ratio of consumers living in suburban areas, and the highest proportion of consumers residing in the Midwest area. They also, or this third cluster, reflected the lowest consumption of fresh salad mixes across the clusters. So this finding is congruent in the fact, or with the fact that consumers with healthier diets usually have a higher preference for environmental footprint claims. When analyzing the market preferences, we can find that the skeptics had the highest preference for retail markets compared to their counterparts. So we can say that the negative effect of online markets could be related to the fact that consumers in the skeptic group were older than, or were the oldest across the clusters. As I mentioned before, it's usually that younger consumers are the ones that engage in online shopping. Additionally, we can say that the skeptics show the lowest valuation of all the market characteristics that we evaluate, such as seasonality and organic section. This compared to the deep-rooted and the indecisive. And finally, I would like to mention that the skeptics show the lowest valuation for all the environmental perceptions evaluated in this study. So this second table, it represents like the ordinal profit model. This contains the marginal effect that is expressed in percentage points and the standard errors and the level of significance between each cluster. So for a better interpretation, we use the marginal effects that expresses like the percentage of probability that a consumer belongs to a certain cluster given their demographic factors, market preferences, and environmental perceptions. So like in a general idea, with the bullet points that we can find, we can identify that the demographic variables, including age, number of children in households, area of living, region of residence, market preferences such as organic and family owned, and preference for organic product were like significant predictors of membership for consumers in the three clusters. So I would like to provide like few samples of how to read or how to interpret this marginal effect. For example, regarding the high income, we can say that consumers with high income were 1.10% more likely to be part of the deep-rooted cluster. Regarding the children in household, for example, we can say that consumers with children in the household were 1.44 less likely to be in the indecisive cluster. And talking about organically grown fresh vegetables availability, we can say that consumers who prefer organically grown fresh vegetables were 0.18% more likely to be part of the indecisive. Then, as a conclusion and discussion, we can say that like the main contribution of the article is to make a market segmentation of the U.S. salad mixes consumers, but also like this study can be applied to different like products that are like in the market. So the deep-rooted segment showed the highest valuation of all environmental attributes for salad mixes, like to give a general idea how to represent this cluster. And these consumers were characterized by having like a high income, or having like children in households, college educated, residing in the Northeast, living in urban areas, and self-reported that as Hispanic and that they prefer to shop in direct to consumer and online markets. Then we have the indecisive segment that showed them like a moderate evaluation for all the attributes. Like they have a high value, they point a high value for low fertilizer uses, pollinator-friendly claims, and low greenhouse gas emission claims. So they reported the lowest income consumers living in rural areas and with a preference for direct to consumers and retail markets. And finally, we have the skeptic that show the lowest valuation of all these environmental attributes in salad mixes, that it comprises individuals who place a high value of low fertilizer usage, pollinator friendly, and low food miles. They are represented by female with medium income households, residing in the Midwest, living in suburban areas, with a low consumption of fresh salad mixes, and with a preference for retail markets. So we can say that salad mixes have become of great interest among consumers because they are convenient alternative. And according to these environmental theories like resonant action, intention, and behavior, consumers' values drive their purchases for fresh products. So since sustainability attributes have the potential to influence consumer preference and drive a purchase decision, this study can aid industry marketers in providing foods with claims and labels that are in line with consumer beliefs. And we can see that supplying food with attributes that are consistent with consumers' values can help like food marketers develop trust relationships with beyond the first purchase. And also this market segmentation, or this, I mean, like, this study, this market segmentation can help industry marketers to create like a proper targeting, communication, and promotional statements to make like these attribute claims more meaningful. Thank you very much.